Can you talk a little bit about what you see as the benefits for the small business manufacturing sector out of the TPP?
Sure, absolutely. Well, two things. I mean, one is, and you mentioned supply chain, which is so critical because every U.S. manufacturer has hundreds, if not thousands, of suppliers who feed into these products that we're looking to make easier to export and move overseas. But what we also want to do is bring this agreement to life for U.S. businesses, and particularly for small and medium-sized businesses. And so across the federal government, working closely with our interagency partners, our Department of Commerce team, both domestically in our U.S. Export Assistance Centers in over 100 cities across America, and our U.S. Foreign Commercial Service staff in, spread across the TPP region, but including about 180 people in TPP countries, are ready to help U.S. businesses to be successful in exporting. And it's one of the things that I'm really proud of what we've done to help small and medium-sized businesses, because the reality is big companies are more sophisticated. Those of you who work for big companies, you get very smart, very sophisticated. And obviously there's a lot we do to work with big companies, but the impact that we can have on small companies, our NEI Next and NEI initiatives are a good example of what we want to bring to the TPP region. And our Undersecretary Stephen Seelig and his team in the U.S. Commercial Service have been working very aggressively with our teams across the International Trade Administration to bring this agreement to life. So focusing on the 11 countries and how do we connect U.S. manufacturers and businesses and make them be able to benefit and help them to benefit from these agreements. And so we're really excited. We've already started the outreach. For those of you who have not worked with our U.S. Export Assistance Centers, or we have an acronym for everything, USIAC, which I apologize for the acronym. But if you've not worked with the USIACs, they're really fantastic, and they really help provide the bridge from communities around the country to markets around the world. And what we want to do is really use this agreement and the provisions in the agreement to supercharge what they're doing in focusing companies, and particularly ones who are already exporting, but many of them, particularly small businesses, often are only exporting to one country or one market. And if we can help amplify that across the TPP region, the opportunities for growth are fantastic.
Thank you. It's a bit premature. First, our Congress is going to have to look at this agreement and move forward on it. But I think one of the questions we get a lot at NAM is how on earth is this administration going to implement this and make sure, most importantly, that our trading partners are fully implementing this. Over 5,000 pages, a lot more detail, I think, as you described in a number of the chapters, some new provisions, be it intellectual property or state-owned enterprises. Commerce is going to play a big role in that implementation. How do you see that moving forward, especially, frankly, since we have seen some implementation hiccups? We at NAM have talked a lot about some of the issues on Korea. Some have been resolved, but others are still quite troubling. We've got some work my colleague Ken is leading right now on Colombia, where there's really some issues there as well. How is the Commerce Department at the administration gonna make sure this gets implemented?
Well, and the thing I would say is, trade is important. Opening up markets is incredibly important. Obviously, provides great opportunity for American businesses. But the other side to that, and one that we take a responsibility we take incredibly important, is enforcement and making sure that our trading partners are following the rules. Because frankly, these agreements don't do us any good if our trading partners don't follow the rules. So we are very committed, both our enforcement compliance team within the Department of Commerce, working with our colleagues at USTR. We have already started looking at this, though, and we will be very prepared when the agreement goes into place to start working on that and really start pushing. I mean, many of you have worked with our teams both at enforcement and compliance and also in the commercial service already. And one of the key responsibilities we see is helping in the informal process of dealing with market access issues. WTO cases are the big kind of headlines, and they get all the excitement and energy. But every single day, our teams are out and working in partnership with USTR, but working, as we kind of describe it, below the waterline. You see the iceberg above the line, which in WTO cases, but there is a huge amount of less formal but incredibly important dispute resolution that goes on short of bringing a WTO case or short of bringing a case under one of the trade agreements. So we are very committed to that because we recognize that enforcement is an important part of what the American people in supporting these trade agreements. One of the things that's very important is making sure the American people know that they will get the benefit of it, and they will be fighting every day to make sure that our trading partners follow the rules.
Great, thank you. So raising it up a tenor, and you'll hear from some of the companies today, strong supporters of the TPP already in the manufacturing sector. Not everyone has that view. And we've got Thea, who just came in from the AFL, who could give that labor perspective. But we've got some industries in the sector who are concerned. We saw the news just 2 days ago that the Ford Motor Company is pulling operations out of Japan, Indonesia as well, has very strong views about the TPP and that. There's other industries out there as well, as you well know. Piece of the intellectual property, while much of it might be great, doesn't really, come even close to U.S. law for all industries. Other concerns out there. USTR probably has the lead on some of this, but you are Mr. Manufacturing at the Commerce Department, and Services, I should say. But what is the Commerce Department doing? How are you reaching out to the industries and those concerned, and how do you respond to some of this?
Well, let me preface with this. Globalization and economic change is going to take place around the world. We all recognize that. That's going to happen whether we do any trade agreements or we don't do any trade agreements. That is happening every single day. And what we're focused on in the Commerce Department is how do we win the technologies of the future, and how do we make sure that the United States is very well prepared to win the economic race for the future, and frankly to make sure that our companies are benefiting, that we're creating jobs right here in the United States. So there are a couple things I point to. One is I mentioned the Manufacturing Institutes, NNMI. That is so important because you look at what, for example, China's done in terms of the strategic emerging industries, and they've said they're going to identify what they see as key sectors, and they're going to go out and they're going to spend hundreds of billions of dollars trying to capture those sectors. We can't let that happen. We need, as a country, to be organized. We need to be focused. We need to be working together, the public sector, the private sector. We have the best research universities in the world. But also, and I mentioned this in my remarks, this is really important, which is we need to make sure our workers are prepared for those jobs of the future. Because there is going to be a global competition whether we like it or not. And we need to be prepared to win. Having trade rules that we have written or we have worked on, and making sure that they meet the high standards of the United States, that we're raising the standards of other countries, not just leaving them where we are, is going to benefit American jobs. It's going to benefit American workers. And you mentioned Ford, because that is an important one. And I know one of my former colleagues was supposed to be here today, but them pulling out of Japan and Indonesia is a sign to me of actually why we need the rules in TPP. Because right now, Japan, for a variety of reasons, the non-tariff barriers, for cultural reasons, for how their consumer preferences are, is a good example of a relatively closed market. So having the new rules that are in TPP that will bring down the tariffs on automobiles is actually something that will benefit the auto industry. Bringing down those other tariffs will benefit American industry and will help us to sell it. Because I think we need, recognizing that 96% of consumers are outside of our borders, the growth for American companies is actually not going to come in the U.S. market to the extent that we have a hopefully solid, but in a good year we have 3-4% growth, where we're looking at regions around the world, and particularly the TPP region, that are just booming. So we need to be in a position to capitalize on that, to give access to our companies so we can be successful in those markets and not just be sitting back and letting other people take advantage of those.